Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 167. And this episode, we're all going to get to the end together. It just is a matter of how we're going to find our way. Maybe there'll be some timestamps in the show notes. I have to figure out how to put those into Libsyn. But until then, I think we'll be able to figure this out because we're talking about signposting and hints and how we find clues in video games. And to help us in that discussion, because you always find your way through the fog and puzzlement better with friends, we are joined by fellow games freelancers, Jesse Vitelli and Asa Greenriver. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's gonna be a good one.
I'm really excited to put the upfront. Geoff and I were gracious enough to and grateful enough to receive review codes for Dragon's Dogma 2. And I, of course, have been obsessed with it since the moment I turned it on. And on the way to PAX East, on the train with Jesse, I was talking to Jesse about the game because Jesse had his article in Game Informer, had just come out, and I didn't want spoilers, but I wanted to talk the game a bit, and we were talking about why we love this game. It occurred to me that I hate not knowing where to go in games, yet Dragon's Dogma 2 might be one of my favorite games of all time, and that seems a little backwards. The way it guides me, even though there aren't the clear signposts that are in a lot of other open world games, are really interesting and unique, and it got me thinking about how games do that well, and how some games overly hold your hand and how some games don't at all. And then we were out to dinner during PAX East with Asa, and I brought this up, and Asa's like, I want in. And I was like, you got it, buddy.
Hell yeah.
And here we are.
Yeah, I invited myself.
I'm happy to have you. It's honestly a crime it's taken so long to get you on the main show. The thing that I really want to talk about to start is what's a good way to engage in an open world? I feel like the reason that Dragon's Dogma 2 and by extension, the first game, Dragon's Dogma, does it well is because even though half the time there aren't waypoints, and when they are, it's like a general area, but there are other things within the world design that really kind of take you through. And I guess I'm curious, I'll start by asking Jesse, do you think that what Dragon's Dogma 2 does specifically is unique for open world design, or do you think it's actually going backwards because it's kind of hearkening to older stuff?
I don't know if I'd call it unique because you look at something like an Elden Ring, you look at something like a Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild, right? There are quest markers in those games, the same way that Dragon's Dogma sometimes has quest markers, but the game is giving you suggestions, and it's hey, go over here and talk about this thing, or go over here and look at this thing, and then you end up being embroiled in something much bigger than you initially thought. And so I think Dragon's Dogma 2 specifically is hearkening back to the original game in Dark Arisen, because it's hey, we're here a decade later and we haven't changed in that regard. In fact, we're probably going to be a little more obtuse than we were in the first game for a lot of reasons. And I think it is an interesting balance of there's two routes to go down, right? You have we're going to checklist everything for you and put everything on the map and make sure you don't miss anything. And there's other design philosophy that is, we're not going to tell you most of the stuff. And in fact, you're probably going to miss things. You're probably going to get locked out of things. And it's really interesting to see which studios decide to go which way with their franchises. I never thought Zelda would have went the way of, hey, you know what? We're not really going to tell you a whole lot, and you're kind of just going to have to figure it out.
I mean, it's funny because that is very much how the original Zelda games were, but by necessity and for different reasons. And so it was a surprise, but a welcome one.
So everyone on this call, to be fair, is a fan on some level of the first Dragon's Dogma. But Asa, I know it often drives you crazy when I list all the people who got me playing this game, and you're I was playing it first. I'm OG. And so
just say my name.
And so I'm curious, Asa, coming to Dragon's Dogma 2 and even coming to more modern open world games, do you prefer this kind of design? Because I'm kind of caught in the middle, right? I like to have my handheld in some stuff, but then, like I said, with Dragon's Dogma 2, every time I discovered a thing, I was ooh, yay. I'm curious, where do you normally land? Do you prefer to have your handheld a bit and be guided, or do you like the more kind of obtuse stuff like Dragon's Dogma, Dark Souls, Elden Ring kind of a thing?
For me, it's a little bit of a blend, right? So timing is very, very crucial for me. I only have so much time. I talk about all the time. I got 2 little kids, and we have 6 pets in this house. So the time that I get for myself, for Asa, is pretty small. It seems like it wouldn't be the case, but I almost like not having my handheld. Like, yes, I want to get through a game and I want to hit the objectives that I'm supposed to hit, but 9 times out of 10, I'm exhausted and I just want to I want to have that escapism in a world. And it kind of pulls you out a little bit for there to be this constant chiming or this constant breadcrumb trail in front of you telling you where to go, when really I just want to get lost in a world and find whatever I can find along the way. Like, I love that Zelda went that route. I love the way that Elden Ring does it, and obviously I love the way that Dragon's Dogma does it.
That's an interesting point, is the immersion.
Very much so.
I hadn't thought of that, but I think the less hand-holding, the more easily it is to get immersed in a story.
Because you have to do it yourself. You're not getting a checklist. You don't talk to somebody and then they highlight certain words and it shows up in your quest journal and suddenly you're doing a to-do list.
Yeah.
Games that have a to-do list, games that follow like, Jesse, while you were kind of explaining like the continuum of how well they hold your hand, I almost thought of, so on a scale of Sierra to Ubisoft, how much are we giving everybody something? And the Ubisoft model, you're right. It's hard to walk away when there's still stuff on the to-do list. If it's like, you have to do this one specific thing to move the needle forward, to cross that off, then you're not going to be searching for things. You're going to be looking for one thing. And trying to find the pieces is how you invest and how you immerse.
It's funny because Dragon's Dogma came out in like end of March, like late March, and having just come off of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and this is something I've talked about before, but you have like two opposite ends of that philosophy, right? Rebirth is like, we're going to put everything on your map. We are going to make sure you don't miss anything. We're never going to lock you out of something. We want to make sure that if you're in this game, you are going to be able at any point to see every piece of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. And then you have Dragon's Dogma, which is like the exact opposite. It's like, we're not going to show you a lot. We're intentionally going to lock you out of things if you don't complete them in a timely manner. We're not going to put things on your map. You are going to have to do the detective work. You have to do the legwork to find these things. And so it's really interesting to like watch people react to both of them kind of back to back and see like, oh, some people enjoy this style more while other people enjoy this style more. I'm back in the Final Fantasy 16 DLC right now, and that is another game that is like, we are going to mark everything on your map. We are going to give you an option to directly teleport back to the quest giver to just hand these things in, and I am just checking boxes as I go down. And it's like, depends on the game, depends on the person. There's so many variables about like what you would enjoy, and I think that it's been fun to pick this apart and see like where everybody falls in it.
Yeah, I think some of it comes down to also how the game deals with the consequences of not doing what they lay out for you, however transparent they are about it. Dragon's Dogma is very much about you didn't complete that in a timely manner. The world still turns. What are you going to do next? Whereas, other games, if you don't do it, whether they are clear about the objectives or not, whether they mark your map or not, whether you've got the NPC going, hey, I think I saw something shining over there, or not, no matter what it is. And it's the same inflection every time because that voice actor recorded that only once, but you're hearing it every 1.8 seconds. I'm just looking around the room because sometimes there's other items for me to find, kind of thing. So however much they do that, if you don't complete their objective, and then it's like when there are riddles in Dungeons and Dragons. If the dungeon master knows what the solution is, and you're not giving them the precise solution, you're not getting out of that locked room, or you're not finding that quest hook. But if it's just, well, we do our best, and then something happens otherwise, that's going to be a lot better. And I'm going to enjoy a world that, if it does that, I like it when it tells me almost nothing, and I am required to dig through it to find the details. And that's why I think it works for a game like Dragon's Dogma 2.
Yeah. And also what Jesse brought up is really interesting to me because Jesse brought up one of the biggest RPGs of the year. I mean, they're both RPGs, right? Like Dragon's Dogma is also an RPG, but they're so different. Like I would never imagine a game like Rebirth would be a Ubisoft open world style game, right? But that's kind of what they put into it. Like they put in the checklist, they put in the stuff on the map. I think that's really interesting. But like what Geoff brings up is really interesting because what I think makes Dragon's Dogma 2 more palatable, at least for me as someone who bristles against that stuff in like other games like Elden Ring. Like I ask Jesse every 10 minutes where to go in Elden Ring because I really just didn't know. And walkthroughs, some of which Jesse had written, were also kind of obtuse sometimes because like that's just Dark Souls, you know?
Right.
It's like you have to go here and do this thing. But like the pawn system, which you were referring to, It's like you're on an adventure with your buddy. I mean, I'm very grateful that my whole adventure, I was joined by Sephiroth 2, which is the sequel to Sephiroth and Jesse's pawn, who never shut up. Like, all pawns are talkative.
Sephiroth 2 does not shut
He
up.
was just talkative. But I think there's something different about that, right? Like thinking about like Metroidvanias and open world games and how like they mark the map, they tell you exactly where to go. You go do the thing and then move on. Whereas in something like Dragon's Dogma 2, sometimes the pawn will go, hey, I went on this adventure with someone else and I know where that is. You can follow me. But you're not going to a waypoint. You're following this one person. If they get killed, if they get lost, if you get attacked by a griffin and then a cyclops and then a troll and then another griffin.
It was the same griffin.
It came back later. It's one of those things that I think make that world design specifically really interesting. Like everyone talked about that first long walk from the first major city to the second one and how like everyone encountered a ton of monsters on the way just because of the design of the way that world worked. And I just don't think you'd get that kind of experience in, say, a Rebirth. You'll still fight monsters on the path, but it just doesn't feel as much like an adventure because you're just trying to get to the next thing.
It's not built with emergent systems the way that Dragon's Dogma 2 is.
Yeah.
Like Dragon's Dogma 2 is the game of like, what are your war stories as you've gone from place to place?
Yeah.
Like, what is the weird thing that happened to you? The family of griffins that show up, the Cyclops, the Sphinx, whatever creature you have it be. It's almost like every play session is like Monster of the Week.
Yes.
Where it's like,
Yeah.
this is what I found this play session. This is my episode of Jesse Plays Dragon's Dogma 2.
What's funny is that makes me think of please bear with me for a moment, playing Pokemon Sword and Shield and the first time going into the wild area, the way that they have it set up.
Yeah.
Everyone encountered that Onyx. And you go like, oh, well, that's a pretty big Pokemon. It's an Onyx. That makes sense. It's relative. Like, oh, whatever. You run up to it and it's 20 levels higher than you. You don't spend the rest of the game living in abject terror or anything else, but it lets you know that you're gonna have to like do a little bit of detective work, and sometimes you're gonna run into some bad situations, which is as far as mainstream Pokemon will get for a while, or certainly in its current state, in giving you that same sense of danger and those same war stories of, stay on the path or not. You know what?
Yeah.
I'm not going to hold your hand. Something's going to happen one way or the other.
Yeah, I think the handhold, I don't know, like I wanted to come into this discussion saying, is one better than the other? I think as I'm already learning just based on the limited conversation and as we continue to grow, there's no right way, right? I think the game design only gets you so far and it's everything else. I think about how I haven't really liked the last few Grand Theft Auto games. They just haven't been my thing. And yet I loved the new Spider-Man games. Mechanically, while the combat is different and some of the world is different, they're mostly the same as far as it's an open world game with a checklist of objectives, a narrative that takes you through it, and yet one is better than the other. And I think it comes back to what you were saying about the emergent systems, Jesse. Like some games make you feel like you're the character and other games are kind of like, oh, you're just doing this thing until you get to the next thing.
And if you've got tasks after tasks and your work is never done, you do kind of feel like Spider-Man.
Yeah.
That's true.
Especially if those tasks overlap and you're like, all right, I got to figure out, do I want to stop this crime or do I want to go save the Jazz Museum?
Right.
Who's to say?
Save the Jazz Museum.
Yeah, always.
And I think, Matt, to what you're saying of like, where's this conversation going to go? Not necessarily one's better than the other. I think what this conversation could evolve to is why can't we have both? Why can't we have the options in games? Last time that I was on one of your shows, I was talking about Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and I'll talk about that any chance that I get, because the way that they revitalized that game was doing just that. So when the game first came out, it was very holding your hand. It was very Ubisoft. Mm-hmm. It added the progression system and everything. But then when they added the realism mode, which brought it back to Ghost Recon roots, that changed everything because it took away all waypoints. Made you feel really immersed because now you are surviving on this island by yourself. We're not going to show you exactly where to go. We're not going to put little blips on where these pickups are. So I think having that, maybe even in accessibility, if they want to have sliders as far as, how many indicators do we want to have on the map, or, how strongly do you want your hand held through this storyline? I think that would be an incredible option for games moving forward, because there are times when, okay, I want to move forward Dragon's Dogma. Like, I want to move the story along. Can you please just pull me a little bit because I've got 15 minutes to play? So necessarily this isn't the time that I want to get lost. So, maybe that's somewhere we could go. when it comes to games.
I mean, it's a good point. It's funny. Like, the opposite of Ghost Recon is like No Man's Sky had nothing, like literally told you nothing. And then they put like a whole set of like rails into it to give you missions and give you guidance. I think it's interesting that you're right. There's no reason we can't have both. I only played a couple hours of it, but the newest Prince of Persia, well, I guess now not the newest Prince of Persia because that's a roguelike coming out, but the newest one that's been released, you have like two different modes. And it's a Metroidvania. One is like, we'll give you a clear waypoint. This is where you're going. Go there. We'll tell you what you need to do. But there's another mode where it's like, it's more obscure. Like, they kind of leave breadcrumbs, but you kind of have to look for where the next place to go is. And like different Metroid games have done levels of that. Geoff and I guested on an episode of Tales from the Backlog covering all three versions of Metroid 2, Samus Returns. And all three of those games had different markings from some to none to way too many.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I'd never thought of that idea that games could have both. I guess it depends. Like, I don't, obviously, a FromSoft game's never going to have that, right? Like, they're designed to like be as obtuse as possible. But that's not even true because Elden Ring eventually added more. Right, Jesse? They like eventually added like a few more markers on the map and like made some things clearer after the initial launch.
I do not remember. It's been a while.
Yeah.
That sounds about right to me.
Yeah.
But I feel like I have that kicking around in my brain somewhere. I wrote a new story about that probably.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I think it's funny that if I'm not mistaken, this is just sort of off memory. Originally with like Dark Souls, as it started, I know that players can leave notes for other players.
Right.
And
yes.
that was meant to be sort of an evolution on the idea of the latest games were at the arcade. And if you wanted to know how to get through a game or anything like that, you would talk to other kids at the arcade, very Tower of Draga kind of thing. And then as that got into like PC RPGs in the 80s, that was still that kind of thing. And this was that idea. The game's not telling you, this shiny light, this blip on the map. Everybody else is saying, yeah, jump off that cliff, see what happens. And sometimes they're helping you, sometimes they're not. And that's part of the world and what it's meant to be. We are creating the lore. And I'm not saying that fits for every game or every experience, but it's an interesting tactic to take and one that seems to certainly suit Dark Souls, if not other FromSoft games.
I actually really like the Dark Souls comparison because I think the messaging system is really interesting, and I think that the limitations they put on that system work for it, where it's like you can't write whatever you want. You have to use the pre-selected words. And so players have to get creative with their sort of hints when, like, at this point, most of it is just people memeing.
Yeah.
But, like, it's still like an evolution of a system, right? And I think another thing that not enough people talk about is like actual level design. When you crest a hill, are you in the distance seeing something that is going to catch your eye and point you in a direction? Because a lot of the time, environmental storytelling is like the thing that will guide you. And I think Dragon's Dogma does it like mostly pretty well. I think the desert area gets a little dicey, but like there are moments where you're just like, oh, there's like a broken down tower over there. Nothing is pointing me in that direction, but personally, I want to go look at that. And then you stumble into something, and then you fall down the rabbit hole. So it's really important when you're like on the path, like on the walkable path, like what is the game actually showing you, and like what are you as a player like noticing and marking mentally, like this is what I want to look at, this is what I want to look at. That looks like a nightmare. I don't want to go over there. And so some games that are designed in a way where they have to waypoint everything for you aren't necessarily designed to do the sightlines thing. And so it really comes down to like, how did they craft this world, and how do they expect the player to then progress through it?
And how important are the things that you find? If you put no indications anywhere and the things that you find have potentially either things of great power, lore of great import, that could either be, oh, well hidden, very cool, or it could feel very much like you throw your hands in the air. Well, how was I supposed to know about that? How was I supposed to find that?
Right.
But if you put little tidbits or some weird little diversion or something that fills in the world, then you've discovered something. That's its own joy and that's its own thing, but it's not something necessarily that you're going to need to put something on the map and go, talk to that old guy, something funny happens. Like that, you'd have a memeing message from Dark Souls.
It's why I think the Korok seeds are such a genius design. Because it's just enough reward for finding something off the beaten path. It's like, oh, this on its own is not necessarily that fulfilling.
And if you miss it,
it's not detrimental. And so it's like, oh, I found 2, 3, 4, and suddenly they start to collect, and you're like, wow, all of these times I've looked at different things and I've gone off the beaten path. I've been rewarded for it, and now I'm getting an inventory slot upgrade, which is like incredibly useful. So it rewards you for consistently doing that. And if you don't do it, you can still get through that game. It might be a little bit harder, but it's not detrimental to your playthrough.
It's not an exclusive reward, but it is a definitive and tactile reward.
And they put enough of them in there that like you're bound to find enough of them regardless.
And it feels like madness to get all of them. So you're like, you will, you'll have a point of like, well, if I have found like 3/4 of them, but if I get a few more, I'll get the next inventory slot. That'll be enough. I can walk away from this, whatever that might be. And that's healthy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, bringing up Breath of the Wild actually and Tears of the Kingdom earlier too, it's like those are games unique for this for me because they're the only 2 games I feel like where truly I could walk in any direction and find a thing.
Yeah.
A shrine, a Korok seed or whatever. Like even Dragon's Dogma 2 at its best, I'll probably find something that's going to kill me. Like that's guaranteed if I walk in a direction in that game.
Yeah.
But what those Zelda games did really well for the things that I love and hate about both those games is that the sense of discovery was always there. You always found something. And I think you're right, Jesse. I think that's key and what the checklist games sometimes lack. I think about Dragon Age Inquisition a lot because it's a BioWare game that has the BioWare trappings of narrative that I love, but also some of the worst open world design. It's not a bad game, but I think something that Andromeda does actually a little better is like, it doesn't feel like it's worth exploring. Like you talk to certain people, you find certain quests, but like everything's marked on the map and it ends up kind of feeling tired. Whereas again, a thing like Breath of the Wild or even Sea of Thieves, the handful of times I've played it, like you are always rewarded for exploring in Sea of Thieves. And I think those kinds of like letting you go kind of games, non-handholdy games are the best because the sense of discovery is what drives you in those situations.
I think too, we've moved well past this, but I did want to comment on it. Something, Asa, that you were talking about as far as accessibility and a sliding scale of what there is to find and what there is to mark on things. Matt and I recently guested on Flashback 64 talking about GoldenEye and something that they did for their difficulty settings. As one may recall, if you ever played through the single-player campaign, which some people didn't, or some people forgot it was there, the objectives are still there, but the higher difficulties that you select, you have to do more of the objectives. It's not just get to the end. It's also get this. It's also do that. And I wonder if there is a certain flip on that, twist on that, where some open world games, not necessarily wrapping it up in difficulty, or maybe so, but putting it in a sort of like, not one difficulty is more or the other, but you're choosing what your difficulty is. Because some folks, for accessibility purposes, they'll need the indicators in game just to remember what's there. And you don't want to take that away. But other times it's kind of a... I remember playing through Riven, a sequel to Myst, with my dad. And he had a notebook that he would just write down everything. Any sort of, notes that would happen, strange pictures that he saw, anything else. Like he had a whole clue book. And the fact that it's gone is such a great loss to me. I love that kind of stuff. And games like this, any of these open world games, could have that kind of experience. And I almost go, do we need to bring back instruction manuals? Because I think we need to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something I've always wanted, but that's just kind of my backdoor campaign. Yes, please.
To kind of go back to that, the difficulty conversation, not to keep talking about Breakpoint, but, what they do in Breakpoint is you can either hard select, all right, I want to do the traditional, what it launched with, or I want to do the realism, old school way to play. But then you have the advanced option where you can actually go in and select for every single thing. Do I want the helicopter to patrol a lot, a little, or not at all? I want my camo to be, make me completely invisible or a little bit visible, and there's sliders for every single thing. How often do I want the enemy to patrol? Do I want them to have the ability to call in reinforcements? I think really breaking down to the nitty gritty, for me, I think moving forward would totally be the way to go for games. Do I want to have my hand held? But let's say I don't necessarily want to have the difficulty challenge. I don't want things to be harder, but I want my hand held less. Then I can go into that advanced section and just kind of pick and choose.
It's funny. It's almost as if they're giving us randomizers. In the way that randomizers for games are done for speedruns and things like that. How hard can we make it? How much can we hide? How much can we do? It sounds as though we are only one person's idea away from having that in game. But this also, to give the sliders to the player, allows you to craft it into the experience you want. And I think there are plenty of games where my first time through it, I'll want my handheld a little bit.
Yeah.
I try to play a lot of games. I don't play nearly as many, and I think little help goes a long way for me. So having those signposts, those points of accessibility the first time, but if I really loved the game and I want to go back, we always skip the tutorial the second time, and letting us do that's a great thing. And letting us remove those little pieces as we go is almost a new challenge. Like, yeah, I know all the twists and turns, but how well do I remember all those twists and turns?
Right.
That's very fertile ground. I love that. Yeah. I love that, Asa.
And even add, like, let's add just a little extra layer of, let's just give every game companions. It doesn't necessarily have to be to the degree where it's the same person making their voice line for every single thing.
Right.
But I think about a game like Fable, Fable 2 specifically, where you had your dog companion. And so you might just be running along, not paying attention to the glittering trail, which, by the way, I think that's another game that does it wonderfully, of having the glittering trail. It doesn't stay there permanently, just kind of comes and goes to gently guide you in the direction of your objective. But having your dog with you, and the way that you could just be running around and exploring, visiting an area you've never seen before. And it might not be the main quest, it might not be a side quest, but it's just a point of interest. And your dog is just kind of barking and just walking in a general area, not taking you directly to said thing. But I love that also about Dragon's Dogma, of listening to all the pawns talking to each other. Oh yeah, I've done this quest before. Oh, I've talked to that guy. He's a real meanie. Don't talk to him. And then you go do it anyways. So like, throwing in a companion in some way, shape, or form. And I feel like a lot of games do have that, but they just don't utilize it in the right way.
Yeah, it's funny. I am slowly playing through a playthrough of Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth with my partner. And the way that we play games, when we are playing games, if it's a single player game, she holds the controller and I'm sort of either on guidebook or on a way of helping whatever else. And Infinite Wealth does a fun thing where certainly if you go through some of the dungeony areas, members of your party, if there's like a little item to pick up, will do some variation of wait, was there just something over there? I swear there's something around here. And they time it really well that wherever you're within like 2 steps of pressing X and picking it up. But I'm also in real life doing exactly that, Asa, where Sarah will be running around the world and she's great at finding items, like whether it's the little suitcases that are consumable items or things like that, or the little shiny crafting pieces everywhere. And I will just be like, she's trying to find all sorts of stuff and I'm just looking around and going, item, glitter. That like I'll point and it's like, where? Just turn around and kind of thing. And I can of course communicate with her because I'm a real person, I swear. And that's fine. But you're right. Like having the dog or having something that's someone, something, some entity that isn't necessarily Navi. That's not, hey, listen the whole way through. But if you had a Tinkerbell, like a fairy that's a silent fairy, like flying around on spots.
Or a Tingle.
Yeah.
A Tingle.
Oh my God.
Now we're talking.
I want
Now we're
Tingle
talking.
as a traveling companion forever.
I mean, I think about my favorite game of all time, Wind Waker, right? Like if you plug in the Game Boy Advance to the GameCube, you've got the Tingle Tuner, right? Like you've got that little map finding your treasure. Tingle, that's an S tier companion right there.
Man,
If no one got me, Tingle got me.
Yeah, exactly.
listen, you want to know where to go, you go to the man with the maps.
It's true.
That's Tingle, baby.
Yeah.
This is now the Tingle cast.
Kulu Limpa.
Can I say something that I very much am glad we have moved away from?
Yes.
And that is Detective Vision.
Oh my God.
I'm glad we have moved away from
Yes.
the Batman Detective Vision. I think the only like kind of modern game that maybe still utilizes it is Horizon.
Yeah.
Because like Horizon, you've got the focus or whatever that like
Yeah.
spits out the stuff.
Yeah.
But like Witcher had it, Witcher Vision,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
I think it was like a good stopgap for like people figuring out like it's a new generation. We're kind of like figuring out how to do this. We're making bigger worlds. We need to figure out a system that works.
And it felt good for Batman.
Yeah, for Batman, it made sense. And I think that other games have tried to contextualize it, like Witcher with Witcher Vision and then Horizon with like the focus piece. Like it's always contextual, but it's not a lot of fun to just have to every area you're in hit a button and walk slowly while you're kind of looking around an environment for the highlighted object.
Yeah.
It's like almost like too much in the other direction at that point.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we've mostly moved away from it.
I think a twist on it that might actually keep it a little relevant in the right game is having that kind of overlay, but it can't ever show you everything. Again, to go back to tabletop gaming, if you are making a skill check to find something, you're not necessarily saying, I'm going to roll an investigation check and case the whole room. No, are you looking for something in particular? Are you looking at someone in particular? And so if you have those kinds of overlays where it's, I'm looking for the heat signature of bodies because of something. I'm looking for architectural weak points. I'm looking for whatever it might be. You have to either shift through those or you only get something like that, but it can't show you everything. You don't get to be the world's greatest detective here.
Yeah. You're not rolling nat 20s every single time.
Exactly.
Right.
I like that you brought that up too, Jesse, because I remember like in Arkham Asylum, it's perfect. I almost feel like because that game is kind of linear, kind of Metroidvania-ish, and like you need it. It was often signposted in the game, like, all right, we're stopping and we're investigating, right? Especially like the investigation areas, like by the Batmobile, whatever. But once we got to City, and then especially in Arkham Knight, one of the things I hate most about Arkham Knight is I will fly to a new area, land on a roof, and turn on detective vision because I need to find where the thugs are. I need to look
And
where the
just
secret
walk
is and walk
around.
around. As that world got bigger, something like that became more obnoxious. I think Horizon does a decent job with it. I like it in The Last of Us because you're listening and it's contextual to those very specific moments when you're trying to hide from the infected or like when you're trying to see where certain looters are. I think it works better there. You're not using it all the time in that it's context sensitive, but in a game like Arkham Knight, it was like literally every time you got to a new area or was fighting a new villain or in a new dungeon, so to speak, you had to pull it up because you might miss something.
Yeah.
Is,
It's
like
a chore.
You have to use this thing. Yeah, it makes it feel like a chore.
It's sort of the same way that the scan from Metroid Prime is a cool thing, very deep, lots of lore, but also feels like just a weird hit all the things, hit all the points. Actually talking about this made me think of something that is another way that, because signposting is not necessarily shoring up shortcomings in game design. That's a little too crass and oversimplifies. But it does cover up for limitations in technology or conveyance or covers for possibilities because the designer of the game can't be there talking to you while it happens. Whether it was 2D games or into 3D games, into first 3D games, we would have the little, the original Final Fantasy VII with the little pointer over wherever your party leader was running around and the triangles over where you could interact and things like that because of the lush pre-rendered backgrounds. And then we got into HD and we couldn't quite find everything, but we wanted there to be more. So we have detective vision, we have those things, but we're getting more granular and simultaneous systems in game design. So something interesting that I think might be another way to go about it is that kind of way like Last of Us where you're stopping and you're listening and you're taking things in. If you want the game as a system to give an indication of things to find, things to do, your character needs to wait there. You're not turning on a system, you're not doing anything, but if you wait somewhere, if your items shine, they slowly shine brighter. In the same way that most games nowadays are very good about if you go from a bright area into a dark area, you can't see shit for a minute because your eyes need to adjust. The same thing, if your character is in a spot for a while, rather than just having the same voice clips go over and over again, that is its own tacit indication that you're looking around or that you're stopped for a little while. And I think having whatever those pieces, those signposts, those whatever, slowly come into view or after a certain point pop up or whatever it is a way that you're not necessarily going to a new place. All right, let me turn on my magic hunter, arcane detective vision, whatever it is. It's working with you. If you don't need it, it's unobtrusive. It's just like, oh, I guess I've been here for a while. It's like when the fridge beeps at you because you've left it open for too long because it's time to clean out the fridge. It beeps at you. I know it's open, okay? But if you forgot, if it does beep, I'm very thankful for it. I think finding ways to have these be unobtrusive while accessible is where the good evolutions and where the great fits are going to come in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think there are tons of games that have done it right a certain way. And I think as we see more of these systems mix in different games, I think that's when we'll get to see how they can really truly grow. It's funny because I would have never thought of detective vision as a hindrance until you brought it up. And then I went, of course it was. It drove me crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's very easy to forget. In that same way, like Geoff mentioned, so this happens a lot in Rebirth. I've noticed it the most is when you go inside, like I'm in Cosmo Canyon right now in that game. And so like every time you go inside somewhere, it's like it's pitch black for half a second because your eyes are adjusting. Like it's irritating me. But then I think about it and go, yeah, but in real life, if I did that, it would probably annoy me, but it would be actually happening.
And they don't throw battles at you or strange, like reflex-based gameplay in that moment. They're just giving you a little momentary piece of reality or verisimilitude or whatever it is as you go about it.
Yeah. I'm curious, is there a franchise or a series that you think does this best? I mean, I think we're all in agreement that Dragon's Dogma is one of the best that does it, but is there,
Very suitable.
just like Jesse, you had like a definite negative thing to point to with the detective vision, is there like a franchise that you can think of that does this or things like this really well that you want to call attention to too?
Yes. Resident Evil 2 Remake, I think, does this incredibly well. I think the map system in Resident Evil 2 Remake is genius.
Yeah.
The room is red if there is still something in there that you need. And if you walk by something and don't pick it up, it will mark it on the map. That'll be that. You don't have to interact with it. You don't have to do anything. Clear room, it turns blue. That's it. It's literally as simple as that. The game, waypoints where to go, for sure, but like that's the nature of Resident Evil. But it doesn't tell you how to do the puzzles. It doesn't tell you when Mr. X is around the corner. I mean, those are all audio cues and everything. Like, it still does that sort of, hey, we want you to be immersed. We want you to be, this form of escapism. You are in the police station with Leon or Claire. You are surviving for your life. But we are going to give you the most minuscule tools to just help you as a player be able to communicate, hey, this room, don't worry about it anymore. You can move on. You don't have to walk around this room a million times, especially with a game like that is so visually dense because the environments are so small that they can really cram pack so many of those rooms with just stuff. And it's like you're not looking in between the rafters for like a grenade. Like it's like, hey, the grenade's going to highlight when you walk by it. It's going to ping on your map. If you don't want to pick it up now, that's great. Come back to it later if you want. Otherwise, move on. And I think that is like the perfect balance of we're not taking anything away from you as a player. We're not holding your hand, but we're going to communicate just enough information to you.
That's such a good point. Yeah, I'm still actively playing the second game on stream very slowly because I'm a coward. But I love that system because it tells me when I need to go back. And actually, what I really love is that how Resident Evil 4 Remake builds on that, right? Like instead of the rooms changing color, the doors do to those rooms. But they also change color. And if you miss a thing and don't pick it up, it shows up on the map. It's a really great way to like let you glance at the map really quick when you're almost dead and maybe need a first aid spray and you don't have one on you or in your trunk. You can look at like 3 rooms back and go, oh shit, there's one there. I just got to get there.
But you still have to make the trek.
Right.
The game's not giving it.
No.
The game is like, you want to go back there and get that thing, you still have to go back there and get that thing. It's still a risk-reward system.
Knowing is, in fact, half the battle here.
Yeah, literally.
Literally, yeah. Well, and it's funny, mentioning the map indicators, the door indicators. I'm thinking of much older forms of signposting like that. The original Kirby's Adventure. If you found every secret in a level, when you exited the level, the door turned white. If it still was brown, it meant there was still stuff to find. The little flag would pop up and you can move on to the next thing. Another door would unlock in the world. But at a glance, as you're moving around and, you start your file up on the game and you're at 97%, what secret am I missing? Check the doors. The NES isn't exactly known for having deep, complex systems for holding your hand, for letting you know all those things. So being able to have those sort of visual indicators, it was great then. It's great now.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Jesse, when you talked about that system of like the rooms changing color, there is a game that's like on the tip of my tongue that does something very similar. The one thing that really is prominent in my mind is, Matt, you were talking about Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
And, we're talking about detective vision, the way that they use the spider sense vision, the fact that, you're just clicking R3 and it doesn't stay on. It just kind of like does a pulse, kind of give you a quick scan. There were times that I felt maybe I just relied on it too much, but I liked the fact that it just kind of like came and went. And it's still really left to me to figure out how to get to a point or, to figure out like where someone was. But I think that's just, one game, one franchise that does that specifically very well.
Well, yeah, and also when it signposts it, you see the icon like you're looking through a HUD on the map ahead of you, but it doesn't show you exactly where it is. You see it above the buildings and you still got to get there. And I think that really is a much better way than just kind of, there are other games, earlier Spider-Man games and other superhero games where it would be like that icon's just there in the sky. You just got to keep going. Like in the Arkham games, in Arkham Knight, the bat signal is wherever you put a waypoint, which is helpful, but it's at least in the sky and you're like traveling towards it. Yeah, I think that's another really great feature that kind of is showing you where to go, but you still have to get there on your own.
Right, and I think, too, with it being a pulse rather than going into a mode is super helpful. Because a lot of times when you're looking for things like that, that's all you need. You're like, I know I'm looking for something, or is there anything to find? Ping, oh, okay, cool, in that direction. More than half the time for me, certainly, that's all I need. It gets me in that direction, and I'll be able to work within the world of the system of the game to find what they're looking for. If not, I'll ping again. Rather than those times where I find myself, whether I'm doing checklist stuff, things on the map, I'm staring at the mini-map the whole time. I'm not immersing myself in the world of the game one way or another. I'm just looking at what the map is.
I love how Sea of Thieves, you use actual tools within the game to guide you to treasure and other things. You have a compass, you have a map. And I think like they're so diegetic to the game itself. Like you're not pulling up a map screen. You're literally looking at the map in game, and it's helping you kind of get to the thing that you want to get to. And I think that's a really great way to do it. Also, I think when they're contained within the narrative of the game, it's really interesting. It's like going back to both of the open world Zelda games, like you're opening the map and it's giving you an idea, but you have no idea the terrain. You get a loose idea of the terrain based on the map, but it's not until you get over that vista or get to the top of that tower or get shot into the sky like a cannonball. That's my favorite thing about the second game, Tears of the Kingdom, is when you go on that trampoline and shoot into the sky. Yeah, you can use the map to mark stuff, but more as you're falling, you're just looking, oh, I see a symbol there, or there's a giant thing over there, or like I can glide over there, and you're just using the tools in the world to find the things, and then you can waypoint them and get to them, but you're still finding those markers by literally just looking at the space from a bird's eye view.
Yeah.
Those games also very particularly do well of, if you're doing the shrines and you go in and if you collect all of the chests within said shrine, there's going to be a little shrine logo next to the name on the map. And so if you want to go back, if you're a completionist, for me, I would go through and hover over each icon. Did I have that? If I didn't, I'm like, do I really want to go back and do that entire shrine again just to find that extra chest? And that was kind of, that risk reward as well. I think they did that pretty well.
A game that tried to do the right thing, and Jesse mentioned this game earlier, and to be clear, I love this game. It's actually, I think, it has one of my favorite protagonists in the Final Fantasy franchise, but like Final Fantasy 16 had a good idea of, let's have two different kinds of side quest markers. One that are like really, get you an upgrade and are kind of integral to the gameplay, and then ones that are just not. Unfortunately, because the side quests are fairly abysmal and a lot of them don't have a lot of narrative ties, that system ends up becoming, well, I can ignore those side quests and just do these. And like, there are a couple of really good ones, like a certain Chocobo one from that game that like still I think about and I want to cry. In that game, that system that they created to kind of guide you ends up helping you to ignore the things that they crafted in the world because they kind of fall short.
It's interesting that you bring this up specifically because that's a holdover from 14.
Oh, interesting.
Which is their MMO.
That's right.
The blue side quest markers are the ones that will unlock a dungeon or progress something that will give you an upgrade or unlock some system in the game that you haven't reached yet. And they kind of like carried that over to 16 where it's like the plus signs will give you a chocobo or will, unlock the blacksmith or stuff like that. And like you said, those quests aren't great because again, I think they're also holdovers from 14, not literally, but it's like they do MMO quest design and they kind of did MMO quest design in 16 for their side quests. It's a lot of go here and kill 3 wolves or go here and pick some flowers or go here and talk to this NPC. There's not a lot of like meat on the bone in there. It is really interesting that like I do the same thing at 14 where it's like the side quests, they're not bad in 14, but they're MMO side quests.
Right.
And so you end up ignoring a lot of them except for the blue check marks because it's like those are the ones that are going to give me something I need. And so I'm going to make sure I do those. And then anyone that's not blue, I don't have to even think about. I'm 1,000 hours into Final Fantasy 14. Like I've been max level for years now. Like there are still hundreds of side quest markers all over that world because I don't need to do them. And like you said, like actually signposts what to ignore. And I think that's really smart for newer players, because when you're overwhelmed by a thing, you're like, do I need the side quest to level up? Do I need the XP? Am I going to fall behind the level curve? All these things. And the game is very clearly telling you, don't worry about it. Play the main scenario and get the blue quests as they come along. And that's all you need to worry about. So I think it works on like both ends, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Something I had not considered until you brought that up.
Yeah, well, and also Jesse, the drug dealer of Final Fantasy XIV, the way he got me into the game was like, I really want to experience the story, but I don't know. And Jesse's like, Matt, you could ignore the side quests. Like broadly, you can just do the main story quest and you'll always be the right level. You'll get to see the narrative. And that's what got me through the whole base game and halfway through the first expansion. I own all of them. I'll finish them eventually when we run out of video games, if we ever run out of video games. But like, yeah, I hadn't thought of it the other way. Like I wanted it to be a detriment, but you're right. In 14, it's not. And like, I think about the times when I played City of Heroes or World of Warcraft or literally any MMO I've ever played, EverQuest. There are different kinds of quest markers to guide you on what kind of experience you want to have.
EverQuest did not have quest markers.
I mean, they do now, sort of, don't they? I thought they had, like...
They've been going for 25 years now. I'm sure they've got them at this point, but...
Yeah, I think they do.
Are they 30 million players strong like Final Fantasy XIV, though?
Cumulatively? Over 25 years, maybe?
Probably.
Maybe. Honestly, hearing this about the, basically making a single player experience out of Final Fantasy XIV is probably what will get me to play it eventually.
You can play every dungeon single player now. They added NPCs. You don't have to interact with another human being that entire game.
God damn it.
I live for isolation.
See, now
we're talking.
Now that sounds interesting.
You literally do not have to do. There are very few things in that game that you are actually required to play with other players, and there's matchmaking. You don't have to talk to a single soul.
You have my interest, my attention, and my axe. Like, goddamn.
Yeah. Also, like, your friends can team up with you at any level. Like, Jesse often plays lower level dungeons with me by either switching jobs or whatever, and
That's just fun.
Yeah, it's just fun.
But it's a very funny thing of, how knowing, okay, I can skip those quests, I can do those things. To speak of doing open world games with my partner again, because I like open world games, she loves them. She didn't really play the Assassin's Creed games because she didn't have an Xbox 360 or a PS3 when it was the first few games. And so the first one she did was Origins. And she actually really liked it for a while. And then she was going around hitting all of the points on the map. She is somebody who does enjoy points on the map and those sorts of things, and will still immerse herself as she can. That's just how she does things. She does checklists, and she's good at them. But the way that it was kind of not quite dailies, not quite indicators for things that you can only get if you do DLC or whatever else, but there was a couple of things going on there that she had so these are pointless? Because for her, doing those quests, no matter how minuscule, no matter how much it's getting a cat out of a tree while demons are coming out and we have summoned Beelzebub and the skies have darkened, I will still save that kitten. But the kitten is saved. You do the quest, it is done. If it just keeps springing up again, Spider-Man is the only time she lets that slide. It's fascinating to watch, and it was fascinating to watch then. And so that's something, too, where in the conclusionless conclusions that these sort of discussions often have for us, Matt, I feel it is a thing of, it's not better or worse. It's, does it suit the gameplay? Does it suit the system? Does it suit the world? Does it suit the sort of experience you want to be having? And I would say that one like that, no, that's not one I want to have.
Yeah. I mean, that's funny. I think a follow-up discussion that we may have to have after this episode is like, how well are your quests designed, right? Because that kind of leads into this and it kind of grows out of it, right? I think about Skyrim, a game I've put an embarrassing amount of time into, but thankfully I don't have my old Xbox profile anymore, so we'll never know what that hard number is. But it's definitely in the triple digits, if not higher. But I thought about like when I first found out about the dynamic quests, like the ones that like generate within the world and constantly regenerate, I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then when I had completed the game and was like, all right, I'm done, why are there still so many quests? It's because your work is never done because of your hubris and the quests that auto-generate. And I think in a game like Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls games where they do kind of hold your hand quite a bit, quest markers, all of that, there is some discovery, but it's like kind of somewhere between a Ubisoft and Breath of the Wild where like there is some guidance. I think when you're dealing with quests and like what is required versus not, it can get murky. I mean, I know people who played hundreds of hours of Skyrim and never fought the dragon, never killed Alduin. And it's like, how? That's the point. The dragon that you're supposed to kill in Skyrim?
No idea.
Yeah, exactly my point.
Put hundreds of hours in that game. No idea who that dragon is.
There you go. And
never saw
and
it.
maybe that's why they hold your hand a little more in it. But I think, but I feel like the games that give you less indications on the map are actually ones better suited to having dynamic quests and things pop up like that.
Yeah.
Because if you are doing chore lists on your journal, or the way that I play Baldur's Gate 3, in that I play online with my friends and I am the least charismatic member of the party, so I'm having the fewest conversations. So we go to town, I get the things I need, we're all on voice chat, I'm fucking around, and then suddenly going, we're doing what now? And it's really to just keep things easy. I'll just open up the journal, what happened? Or, sometimes I'll be able to pop in on the conversation and listen in and whatnot, but having that is super useful. But a lot of times when you're just kind of checking this off, having dynamic questing, having daily questing, having randomly generated stuff just keep popping up, that's not why I'm playing an open world game where I'm doing checklists. Open world games where I'm trying to find what's around, okay, yeah, I will kill 3 bears for you, or whatever it is. It just seems like part of the world and is largely inconsequential, but it never has that kind of sting of, I need to do this. It's just here.
I think that the reason I fell off the Assassin's Creed series is because the signposting was so strong, was so heavy-handed. It happened with Origins. I opened the map and saw 30 markers and went, I'm good. I'm done. I think I'll go do literally anything else.
The Assassin's Creed franchise, I said this the other night to somebody, but it has given us some of the worst things in open world games. It is like responsible.
Yeah.
It is the origin point for like so many things that we dislike about modern open world design. The needless collectibles, the towers, stuff that like Ubisoft has actually like largely kind of moved away from. Like specifically, there's a really good thread on Twitter the other day about how Ubisoft actually hasn't had like a tower system in a game since like Far Cry 4 or 5.
Wow.
Or 6. What are they on now?
They're on 6. 6 is
They're on 6 now.
Maybe, okay, 6. I'm sorry. I went too far back. I didn't realize there were 6 of those things. Their last like handful of games haven't really had like major like towers and stuff like that. But to bring it back to Assassin's Creed, we were talking about detective vision, and we actually never brought up eagle vision in the original Assassin's Creed, which is kind of like the original detective vision.
Yeah.
And so that's just like another thing that like kind of Assassin's Creed was like this starting point for. I think that game has evolved in tremendous ways. I think the Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla, however you feel about that open world design, it's really interesting to see that franchise sort of evolve and try something new. And I think that they fell into a lot of the same traps that they had previously. It's just the way they design games, right? Like that is just the way that they know how to craft an open world, and it is going to be a checklist, and some people vibe with that. And as those games have become hundreds of hours long, I don't think anybody could play 150 hours of Valhalla and mark everything off the map and be like, all right, that was everything I needed it to be.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think you make a good point. And I think it's why games like Elden Ring and Tears of the Kingdom and Dragon's Dogma 2 are all getting mainstream popularity. I think it's one because games have become more accessible, more ubiquitous, more people have consoles. But I think part of it is also people want a different kind of world design. And these kinds of games are holding your hand less. Not at all, but definitely less in giving you that more sense of adventure, which I think is what Assassin's Creed 1 and 2 definitely gave us, a sense of adventure, a thrill. When there was a lot of collectibles, but not an insane amount of collectibles, it made it feel approachable. But then the pendulum swung too hard in one direction. And I think a lot of these other games now that are coming out now that are following this kind of more obtuse kind of let you figure it out is swinging back the other way. The term is like player agnostic, even player antagonistic a little bit. And Dragon's Dogma 2 and Elden Ring specifically are absolutely that. Sometimes the game wants to show you how much it hates you in that one moment when you wander into a boss field or get attacked by a sphinx. But I think that kind of surprise is a thing that we got away from, right? Those kinds of things in some games happen less. And look, I'm a play on easy, like a lot of markers. Look, when I played the Yakuza franchise a couple years ago, every game on easy, did all the main quests, did a bunch of the side quests, wanted markers on the map. I think it's just what you want out of a game and out of an experience and the kind of game, right? I don't think there's inherently, shocker, we came to a conclusion that it all can be good. It just depends on what you're looking for. But I think really a lot of the examples you brought up are some of the best ways games have done it, and also some of the absolute worst ways games have done it, like this evolution from Assassin's Creed that Jesse brought up, a franchise that I loved all the way through the Ezio trilogy up to 3 and then fell off of and have tried to go back and just it hasn't captured the same way.
I think for me, a summation of my ideal is I want a game that rewards me for looking behind the waterfall, but never tells me to look behind the waterfall.
Yeah.
Do you know what the last game was that you played that actually had something behind a waterfall? Because I had this conversation the other day where I feel like less developers are putting things behind a waterfall. And I don't know if I'm like a boomer now and like that's just like that's not a cool Gen Z thing to do anymore. I don't know. What happened to the waterfall
The
trailer?
children have forgotten the old ways. And look, you don't even have to put an item back there or a cool cave or anything like that. If you do, I love it. You could just put a weird indicator. You could put the skeleton of the last yuck who tried to do it kind of thing. Yeah. Whatever it is, reward me for trying it. In that same way that you have your pawns telling you don't try to fight that boss. Oh my gosh, you're not supposed to fight everything in Dragon's Dogma 2. But you know what? Wouldn't it be so much cooler if I did fight it and I won? That'd be pretty cool, wouldn't it? The waterfall is both literal and I want to be rewarded for exploring, and I want there to be a certain amount to that, or there be a conversation between me and the game in giving into gamer instincts. If they tell you not to do it, you do it. If you start in a 3D game, I will immediately look behind me. I start in a 2D side scroller and I'm supposed to go to the right, as we always do. I always try going to the left. Do you know how many secrets I found in Donkey Kong Country by doing that? We could look it up and we could find it because there's a lot of them. And any of those times where there's that little bit of environmental storytelling, you could put all the points on the map. I'm still going to check somewhere else because what if there's a secret thing that you're not telling me? And maybe that is me being a bit of a boomer gamer too, where games couldn't tell you everything, or that was the best way for them to hide a secret is to just kind of stick it somewhere and give you the vaguest notion. That's how you find Bum Rush in Final Fantasy VI. You just look for those 5 trees. Off you go. That's where Duncan's house is.
I think a lot about Castlevania 2, and it's like, Neil, crouch down in this corner and get the tornado. And it's like, yeah, maybe I'm just scarred from that. Maybe, maybe I've got to unpack that somewhere.
There's a lot of indie games these days that are doing that level of obfuscation, but they don't have to localize the text in the same way. And localization's gotten better, or it's English-speaking game developers that are making it. So games like Infernax, which is very much, hey, remember Castlevania 2? What if good? That tells you less, but you're still able to piece it together.
Yeah.
And I feel like there was a recent game where I found something behind the waterfall. For the life of me, I'm trying to remember.
So for me, I can tell you the last time I didn't, and I did. I didn't in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. When you first get to like the area before Gongaga, and you can there are waterfalls and lakes. I swam into the water. I swam to islands. I ran to the waterfalls. Nothing.
Are they waiting for the waterfall in the original Final Fantasy VII to be a thing that you look behind?
I don't know.
I really hope so.
Yeah.
But the last game I did see it is an indie game. It was Sea of Stars. Sea of Stars having minor platforming. You were often rewarded for jumping in the lake, looking behind a waterfall. And that's the last time I think I experienced that. But in a AAA, big open world game, I couldn't tell you, Jesse. You're right. I feel like they don't do it anymore. I mean, I have to assume there's a waterfall somewhere in Dragon's Dogma 2 that does that, right?
I couldn't find it.
I mean,
I tried. Asa, have you found a waterfall?
I think Nintendo, kind of does that.
Yeah, that's true.
In their own way. Like if you think about Super Mario Odyssey, like specifically New Donk City, just look at any specific building or I really shouldn't be able to scale that tiny little ledge all the way around that skyscraper, or I shouldn't be able to, get to the top of this one and then hat dash dive across this chasm to get to the next skyscraper to find this, whatever. So I feel like Nintendo still tries to keep that alive a little bit, but yeah, it's very much a lost art.
Yeah.
Skyscrapers are the modern waterfall.
There it is.
They really are.
They really
always, are. People always be saying that.
They're always saying
all the time.
Asa, thank you for bringing up Mario. In a way, that is one of the original signposts in terms of what became the current lineage of gaming. This would be brought up in, playing Mario Maker and making levels. You only have so large of a resolution of these games. You don't see the entire level. There is no way to move the camera around in the NES Mario games. But they could let you know the sort of angle you need to jump by putting some coins. By setting up trails of coins that you are trying to get, they help signpost you towards where you need to go. That's an oversimplification, I think, of the sort of signposting that we're talking about here. But it is another indication of a way that we, even in modern games, those collectibles, those things you're looking for, we're putting some of them down so you know you're headed in a direction, or at least an intended direction. You get all the way to the top of that skyscraper in New Donk City, there's going to be some coins. So it isn't necessarily you've discovered how to play as Luigi in Super Mario 64 or got up there and there's Yoshi, but it is something that goes, good job, nice. And that feels good too. I don't want to feel that level of antagonistic with the games I play. Certainly not Mario games.
Yeah.
There's a few parts of Odyssey where you're not like technically out of bounds, but there are like areas you can get on top of that you're not like really supposed to. But like if you're good enough at the systems, you can get up there and they'll leave you like piles of
Yeah,
coins.
exactly.
And they're like, we know that you can get up here and that you shouldn't, but you did it, and we're going to reward you for like being that good at the actual physical platforming to get to this point and having the like gumption to do it. And I'm like, cool.
Yeah, if you never get there, there's no loss. You're not missing out on anything. And there's no like, I need to get here so I could collect all 100 skull coins that are only for going the hardest ways to get to the most out of reach spots in the game. No, it's just like, yeah, I got those coins. And they're just regular coins. Yeah. And for what the game is and what, that situation is, Jesse, that's perfect.
I will say I'm grateful nobody brought up the yellow paint, because honestly, if you're getting mad about yellow paint signposting, you need something to do with yourself, because it's not the worst thing in video games. Like people make it out to be.
I saw people getting mad at God of War 2018 for that.
Yeah.
And I know that those people have not finished God of War 2018 because they contextualize it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you didn't even finish the game. You didn't bother to see the end of that game because they literally talk about that. And it's like, come on.
Yeah.
And y'all have played Rebirth at least a little bit.
A little, yeah.
No actual spoilers. In chapter 3, you're in the mines and you have to climb up these little areas. Like there's like pads and you can kind of see like the handholds.
Yeah.
You go up them. And there's one section where you have to break a rock. And when you break the rock, you can find the next path up. But it's not, there's no color on it. It looks just like the regular rock. So you have no idea that that's what you're supposed to climb. And the amount of people I saw online being like, I don't want to hear any discussions about yellow paint because this has no yellow paint and this thing is impossible to find. And it is literally like critical path. It's not a side quest. It is like a thing you have to do. And people are running around this area for like an hour trying to find out where they have to go, because sometimes when games are that visually dense, you need a color icon to just be like, hey, we don't want you trapped in this area for an hour that has literally nothing in it. Here's a little bit of paint or a little bit of whatever, splash of color, to just be like, go this way.
Yeah.
Because people don't pay attention.
And Final Fantasy VII Remake did a great job with the little, sometimes like when you're climbing up towards the Shinra building and you have the rope points to get to. Some of them are crucial, some of them are for secrets, whatever. But, yes, you have the voice clip. I think I saw a rope up there. But it has the little reticle that pops up and it's just kind of there's that thing. That is essentially a yellow paint. That is something that works within that feels unobtrusive, but is. None of these are inherently bad.
Yeah.
None of these are inherently perfect. It's just, does it suit? And sometimes it's just, we need an indicator. Color it different. That doesn't always work, but it is a solution.
Yeah, and if you don't signpost that stuff, you end up in Dragon's Dogma 2 seeing an icon on the map, and you're like, oh, a boulder, and then you swing at it, and it runs you and your entire party over, and you take a boatload of damage. So, like, cautionary tale, people.
It's important.
Look at Mirror's Edge, right? A game that is, like, no color. Like the only color you need are the things that you can, like, parkour on. And that game looks, to this day, incredible.
I was legitimately waiting to jump in with Mirror's Edge. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Please take it away. That is literally all I had to say. You want to talk about Mirror's Edge?
Okay. Hit me with it.
Mirror's Edge 1 and 2, they're phenomenal games. I highly recommend people go back and play those. Like when we're talking about signposting, we're talking about yellow paint. Everybody thinks about just the red, the red platforms, the red bar, the red pipes, whatever. But for the people that spend a lot of time or they do a lot of the free running challenges, that's part of the color aesthetic. Faith has the red glove, has the red pants, but there are a lot of areas in that game. I think specifically there's a section in the first game where you're trying to escape like this open mall area and there's cops everywhere. Like the game doesn't really want you to fight. You can if you want, but really you just need to get out. And so at the very end, you see like the proverbial red launching point. What they don't tell you is it kind of pulls in some of that Super Mario creativity of, well, what if I didn't just go all the way down there? You know, what if I just went up this way, up this alleyway? Or, you know, what if I went through this office building and did all these? And so when you take those side roads, they don't have that. So I think, you know, people get so up in arms about yellow paint or red objects or whatever it is, when really that's just to like guide you in that direction. But in the case like Mirror's Edge, where I think they do it so beautifully, it's like, you don't have to go that way. The whole point of that game is to have that free running spirit and to think creatively of how you want to get to point A to point B. I was literally waiting to jump in with that, Jesse. And so when you said that, I was like, thank you. Mirror's Edge. Not enough people talk
Mirror's
about
Edge.
that.
No, it's an incredible video game.
Yeah. Oh, and to bring that up, Jesse, a game that I know, a series that I know Jesse and I have both at least played, and from the first game to the second game completely screw that up. Dying Light to Dying Light 2. Dying Light does some really great stuff with the platforming in a Mirror's Edge sort of way. Yellow marked cliffs, things you can grab. It was Dying Light 1 wasn't a perfect video game, but it was fun to move around that video game and fight those zombies.
So much fun.
And then Dying Light 2 comes out and they listened to the fans, for better or worse, and removed a ton of that stuff. Added black lights and this weird effect where you're turning into a zombie and like you can't free run the same way. And they like locked out some of the parkour mechanics until you unlocked them in a skill tree, whereas you just had them in the first game. Talk about a game that didn't know its audience and didn't know how good they had it. Like, again, Dying Light isn't going to win awards for being the best game, but it was a fun video game to play. And then the sequel took everything that was fun about moving around in that world and removed it, and removed a ton of the signposting, thinking, oh, it'll be a more hardcore experience. No, it was just a bad video game.
That's another case of visual density.
Yeah.
You're taking away some of the signposting, but you're also adding a bunch of other stuff that like clogs up the screen. And there's like a lot of noise, like visual noise, that it's like, I don't actually know what is climbable, what is not. And then they add like new mechanics like the glider and stuff, which I think are actually like really good tools overall. But I think the biggest gripe for me in that game was that they locked so much of that stuff behind the skill tree that it did not feel good to move in that game until you were like almost done with it. And like that game has like a slew of other problems that we don't need to get into that are not relevant to this conversation. But I think like the mixture of removing a lot of the signposting and then having all of this visual noise on the screen just makes it kind of a mess to try and go through. And like I think I said, it's like kind of like trekking through mud in some ways, and that's, you don't want that.
Yeah, it's the minimalism maximalism of Vindication. I mean, something like Mirror's Edge definitely leans on more towards the minimalist side of things, where there is a more austere palette or a more limited palette, and so having those like bright moments, it works, it feels part of the world, it actually makes it feel very cool in that way that limitations can like, I haven't played Mirror's Edge in a very long time, and I didn't have the game at the time when I played it, so it wasn't a full-on thing. But even just like watching footage of it, I'm just like, yeah, this is just cool. And a lot of times you can make big signposting work for you if it fits, if it is. You can make something literally spray painted yellow work if that fits the vibe of the game, committing to the bit, whatever it may be. And yeah, no, if you add more pieces, yeah, it's good that Resident Evil 2 doesn't force you to look in every nook and cranny, because the way the puzzles work, you almost have that instinct of, I need to do that. I need to tank run awkwardly and slide along the side, hitting the confirm button over and over again. That's bad signposting. It's bad conveyance. We're working our way away from that.
Before we wrap up, a question I want to ask. Look, I'll say now at the top, because we've already talked about it a lot. I think Dragon's Dogma 2 is the best open world game ever made. It's definitely my favorite. That's how much I loved playing in that world. Is it the best? It may not be, but I think it's my favorite. So to that end, besides Dragon's Dogma 2, do you have a game that you think does all of this stuff the best? For me, my runner-up answer, because it took me forever to finish this game and I ignored a ton of the side quests. And it was because the signposting, I think, was a nice balance, was The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Universally considered a very good open world game. I think it does lean a little too heavy on the like markers. The world design, like Jesse was talking about earlier, does really lead you to a pool of monsters, a cave with a treasure chest, a dungeon off the beaten path. And so I really loved my time in that world to the point where I had to, towards the end of the game, start ignoring side quests to actually eventually finish it after like 100 hours. I'm curious if there's a game that comes to mind for you that like this is my favorite example of signposting because it's what I really loved about this game, or I really love this game because of how it guided me through it.
This is maybe a boring answer, but I think it is Elden Ring.
Yeah,
I think the more I think about it, it is Elden Ring. I think the way that game shows the player, it lays everything out in front of them. There's very few areas of that game that are actually locked behind anything. And so it's kind of like, just go, pick a direction and go. There are like a few things that like you should do first, but like otherwise, like figure it out. Variety wise, it's very distinct. All of the regions feel very different, but feel connected. There are multiple areas to go to, both on the surface and other places. It's all interconnected in a really fascinating way. I think Elden Ring is one of the first games, and I don't want to say that Elden Ring is directly inspired by Breath of the Wild because development times, all this different stuff happens. It's an example of a game that learned the right lessons from something like Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
Because I do think that Breath of the Wild is a like pivotal moment in game design. The same way that I think Baldur's Gate 3 is going to be a pivotal moment in game design.
Yeah.
And I think it learned the lessons of go off the beaten path. We're going to reward you, but also this is a different game. This game is dangerous. Sometimes we're going to subvert your expectations, and when you think something cool is about to happen, actually we're just going to kill you. And I think even that felt rewarding. It felt like I was learning a lesson. It's like, oh right, this world is dangerous. I don't want to live here. I don't want to escape into this world. But this world is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And this world, there are so many different gears that turn, and they all kind of work in tandem together, and they create this like perfect symphony of stuff. I'm mixing my metaphors now, but like, you get the point. Yeah, I guess it's Elden Ring, the more I think about it.
It's a good one.
I mean, I would definitely give some props to Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of maximalist design. You know from the outset, or you learn very quickly, you're not going to get to see everything. You will start some quests and you can do them in their entirety, but you will also reach the end points and you will move forward pretty inevitably. And you're not going to get everywhere and see everything. And with that comes freedom. I very quickly let go of the notion that like, oh, I'm missing something, or oh, this is going to go poorly. Things go poorly. You move forward. Maybe you get in a fight. Maybe you miss a companion. Maybe you miss out on power, or maybe you go in a weird direction. Whatever it is, those are fun too, and the ways that they went were great. On the minimalist side, I think I do want to call out Shadow of the Colossus.
Oh, good choice. Yeah.
As a game that gives you nothing but exactly what you need to play the game.
Yeah.
If you want to find the Colossi, hold the sword up. Again, it's pinging. It's giving you the thing you're not necessarily, your horse isn't talking to you, telling you where to go. You don't have, look, if there's an Easter egg that makes that happen, it could talk in the princess's language from Ico, and I think that would be both very disturbing and everything I've ever wanted out of video games. But it gets you there. I mean, signposting is just as much, if we really drag the definition, if we really take it outside open world games, they're weak points. They are the little red spots on bosses. They are the sigils that glow. And so that is what you get as well in Shadow of the Colossus. You find these creatures and there's no one telling you anything about it. And so you have to immerse yourself. You have to search. You have to climb. You have to wait. And that is much of a thing of piecing all of that together and making that happen in a game that is as long as it needs to be. Is that the perfect or the best open world game? No, but it's a hell of an execution.
Yeah, I agree. Down to you, Asa. What do you got for us?
Listen, I've talked about this game too much. I was gonna say
Bring it
Elden
on.
Ring.
Bring it on. Let's go.
for it.
I was gonna say Oblivion. I think Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Like, Skyrim was a huge jump when it came to like markers and kind of pulling your hand through things.
And Morrowind was just a
Oblivion
mess.
not that.
Good mess, but a mess.
Yeah, and Morrowind was a mess. And Arena was even worse. Let's not talk about Daggerfall, but no, Breakpoint. Listen, I don't care what anybody says. Ghost Recon Breakpoint, it struggled too much in the beginning for people to really care about it. But what it did to make up for it at the back end, I feel like just so many people missed out on.
Yeah.
We had talked about the sliders, but we talked about the things that we love about Dragon's Dogma and the world, and about how like it doesn't tell you exactly where to go, but it just kind of like there are these contextual clues throughout the world or your pawns. And if you do the sliders the right way in Breakpoint, it's the same exact thing. I think that's why it sticks with me so well. Also, it's like the best Terminator game that's out there right now. They don't tell you exactly where to go. You're going to get some kind of transmission and they're like, yeah, it's in this region. It's snowing. You got to like try to figure it out. There's this weird shadow from this tree. And then you just have to figure out how to get there and find those clues to like to piece those things together. And I think the way that they did that and nobody noticed, they were onto something. They were really onto something. Really shout out to that game for the way that they're basically Dragon's Dogma 2, but with guns.
It's not a bad sell.
Right?
Yeah, it's a good sell. It really is a good sell. And a sentence no one else has ever said. Thank you both for joining us for this topic. I'm really grateful that you were both excited to do it. Before we wrap up, I would love for Jesse and then Asa to tell folks where they can find you online, find your work. I know, Jesse, you don't want anyone to contact you. Jesse always says, don't contact me. But in all seriousness, this was a pleasure. I adore having you both on the show.
Thank you.
Please tell folks where they can find your work and like check you out online if you wish to be found.
I'm Jesse Vitelli. Do not contact me. The thing I've been saying is I don't have like a good universal spot. If you just Google my name, Jesse Vitelli, you'll find whatever you need to find. My Twitter, my Instagram. I mainly post on Twitter if that's where you want to be. You'll find everything you need if you just Google my name. I have the best SEO of any Jesse Vitelli out there.
Nice.
Currently, I'm doing some work at Kotaku. I'm doing some freelance guides for them. So if you need guides and you Google some stuff, you might see my name pop up. You might not. Who's to say? But other than that, yeah, I'm just chilling.
Asa.
I mean, I guess you could probably Google my name and like find my stuff. It's a great sell. No, but you can find me on Twitter at @Greenriver07. I'll make it just a little bit easier for you. And then on TikTok, I post things on there. I don't know what my username is. It might be the same thing as Twitter. I mean, just keep searching. There's only one person that really looks like
Well,
me.
I Googled you without quotes here, and certainly your Instagram has the same, but TikTok hasn't popped up yet.
Yeah, I mean, if you Google me and you pull up Instagram, we got to really know each other. Instagram's a little bit more personal for me, so
That's fair.
Don't even try.
It's the second link.
Oh, geez, that's terrible. Content-wise, Twitter, TikTok, youtube.com/borderline entertainment. And then once I can get, a good working PC, twitch.tv/borderline entertainment, I'll be back on there. But I am still putting out YouTube videos as I can, so that's the place to go.
Amazing. You can also actually, I believe, find Jesse's review of Dragon's Dogma 2 in last month's issue of Game Informer.
Ooh.
Or is it the new issue with Outlaws?
So it's the Star Wars Outlaws issue is the magazine issue it'll be in.
Oh, awesome.
But it is online for free. You can go
Right.
read it on GameInformer.com.
It's not out yet, but it's good to know that my first physical Game Informer in like a decade is going to have your article in it, Jesse. That's very exciting.
I'm the first review.
That's amazing.
Pretty cool.
Let's go. Love to see
That's
it.
sexy.
Thank you both for joining us. This was a wonderful conversation. Listeners, you must have a favorite open world game. I mean, you might not. Maybe you don't play any open world games. And honestly, I get it.
No, that wasn't an assumption. That's a command. You must have a favorite open world
You must
game.
have.
Pick one if you don't.
It will be assigned to you.
And it will be Toontown rewritten.
Oh, God. Yikes. But yeah, let us know what your favorite open world games are and like how you like to be guided through games. Do you like to have your hand held? Do you like it to have no idea what the hell you're doing? Do you like some mix of both? I think there's no right way, but I think there's a right way for you and the kind of game you're playing. And we'd love to hear from you on like what those games are and the kind of design that really brings you into a world and helps you figure out what the hell you're doing.
Yeah, when has a game surprised you with the way that it has held your hand or not held your hand and given you an experience you didn't expect and one that you delighted in? Because there again, it's about how it fits. And sometimes we know our type, but we can always go outside of our purview and find something incredible and fun to play. Please let us know. Get in touch with us. There's so many great ways to reach out. We are Fun and Games Pod across all social media that we are part of right now. Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, Tumblr. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, who you'd like us to talk with and what you'd like us to talk about in future episodes. I don't know, send us pictures of your video game collection or your pets or your
Please.
pets messing up your video game collection. What is something that you absolutely treasure in your video game collection that isn't a video game that you just want more people to know about and you want to flex? You can flex at us about that in particular. You can also go to certainpov.com and find not only so many other fantastic Certain POV podcasts, but also a permanent invite link to our Discord server, where we have a lot of these sorts of conversations. They continue on, and a lot of those sorts of pictures and things also happen. If you want to be up to date on what we're doing, a great place to go to check that out is our Patreon. Patreon.com/funandgamespod. All of these episodes are posted there. Those that have the means and desire to financially support us, we are grateful for all of you. There's an RSS feed where you can get these episodes as well, and you can also check out anything else we're working on. We are grateful for everybody that has supported us, but we do want to shout out those on the high scoreboard. And today, the high scoreboard is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Needon, Luke Lewis, Roger Reichart, Alejandro Alves, Curly Bright, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Robert Prine, Sean Bowen, Wes Bates. Thank you so much for your support. Please enter your initials. The mission will begin shortly. Do you have all of your equipment together? It is very important that you have means to breathe underwater. We won't tell you why.
Amazing. Also, something really helpful is if you don't have a couple bucks to throw at us, there's a free tier on our Patreon where you can just subscribe and see the articles and stuff. But you can also rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice. Our go-tos are Spotify and Apple, which is in the show notes down below as well. But also Podcast Addict, Good Pods, tons of other places let you rate and review. And all of that helps push us to the top of the algorithm. If someone Googles signposting in video games, which I guess you might, we will be higher up on that list if you go ahead and rate and review us. So please do that. And of course, like Geoff said, join the Discord server. The conversation over there is a lot of fun. And that link is also in the show notes.
We like to have these things conveniently together so that you don't feel confused as you make your way through this podcasting world, these strange times, these wild video games, because we want to be able to hear from you about your favorite games as we tell you about some of ours. That's how we find new experiences, new fun, new games. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone.
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back?
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Pass, we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.